Hello everybody and welcome back to another exciting detailed diatribe. I am one of your hosts, Red. I am joined by Blue.
Hello, hello.
And today we have a very special guest presenter for the first time in detailed diatribe history. I would like to reintroduce you all to Magenta, my sister.
Hello everyone. It has been a while.
It has been a hot minute. So here's the story behind today's detailed diatribe. Some months ago, Wizards of the Coast got themselves in hot water again. And everyone was like, D&D, man, come on guys. What are you doing? I was like, hey, I know somebody who's constantly telling me that D&D is for suckers and that there are a bunch of other TTRPGs that are super fun and designed for other things other than D&D. I wonder if she has any thoughts on what's going on. And then, 4 months and 70 slides later?
4 months and 70 slides later, Wizards of the Coast did it again!
Oh, really?
Yeah, oh, there have been 2 scandals in between.
Oh my god. Really, they're in
The
court.
OGL was just the start.
Oh, yeah, it's even better. They hired the Pinkertons.
Oh, damn it, not again. With Watsy, come on. Oh, boy. So, as I understand it, you've prepared, that's the word I wanted. Look, Tears of the Kingdom just came out. I've gotten maybe 10 hours of sleep in the last 3 days. I'm amazed I'm here right now and not astral projecting, so you're just gonna have to take what you can get from me today. But yes, I believe you have prepared for us a slideshow about some of those games and what they are good for.
Yes, so, the way this is going to work is I have a bunch of games that I like, and I'm going to be talking your ear off about them for a while, and then periodically I've put in landmines where I'm going to pause that and yell about RPG discourse for a while.
Oh, goody!
And now that you're trapped in the recording booth, you cannot escape.
No!
You've got the detailed diatribe down to a science already. This is a good sign.
You're a natural kid.
And so, here are, as it says, some RPGs that are pretty neat and you should read and maybe play. I want to highlight that a bit. Reading an RPG is useful in its own right, even if you don't get to play it, even if you can't find a group. It's useful to broaden your horizons and have thoughts about game design.
Oh, I guess if you have an attention
That's why I watch far more videos on video game design than I actually play video games.
Well, that's true. It's a rare video game.
I can't play them all, but I can learn about a lot of them.
It's a rare game where I'm like, I want to experience this for myself rather than just watching 5 million lore videos.
And I have split this up into categories of games that have fundamentally different approaches to how you want to play them and what, the primary focus is. And that's something that you want to consider when you're selecting what game you're going to play, because you'll want a game that fits what you want to do. And one thing I know that we all like around here is mindless violence.
Yeah!
So, here are some cool fight games.
Cool fight games!
Yeah, and I mean, who doesn't want a cool fight?
We all love cool fights.
Yeah. I've decided to start with this one because I want to highlight that it's going to be pretty close in gameplay format to what you expect out of D&D, because D&D is essentially built like this. You've got a narrative mode of play with a simpler system. You've got skill checks, and then you've got spells have narrative utility, and that's more or less it. And then you've got the fights where everyone has a bunch of abilities. To be mean for a moment, I want to highlight this because a lot of these do it way better than D&D does.
Ooh, the spice has already begun.
I think the distinction between fight mechanics and narrative mechanics is really telling in shows like Dimension 20, where there are literally different episodes of the show for narrative and fights.
Yeah,
which, no shade to Dimension 20, it's fantastic, but it highlights how distinct the modes of gameplay are, and how the system tries to straddle both, and maybe it doesn't always work.
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to point out that a lot of people who got into TTRPGs started with D&D. D&D is a very common starter game.
Yeah.
And as a result, what that means is that a lot of people assume that the way that D&D is specifically laid out, its strengths and weaknesses, are a universal fact of how TTRPGs must work. I'm guilty of this. I do a lot of fun reskinning of things in D&D to try and make it work for a horror thing, or I want to introduce this kind of subclass that does this thing, because D&D is fun for me and I enjoy using it like a clay to mold. But the fact is, it is designed to be good at a few specific things, and they're mostly combat related. One of the strengths of 5e is that every class has more things they can do in combat, but outside of that, it's basically just relegated to skill challenges at the table RP.
Yep, these are all excellent points that I cover a bit later.
Whoops.
I get no, it's great. You guys are on the right track. This is excellent stuff. I'm starting with this section because these are the ones that are built to work like that and have that play rhythm, and there are lots of other games that very much don't. And the actual splitting up into narrative and combat sections and sessions that you mentioned that Dimension 20 does is an active good thing, because that's an awareness of and formatting your play around the format the game expects of you, which is something you should always be thinking about when you're selecting a game and when you're playing it. And starting off with
Oh, come on, man.
What?
Fantastic.
What? Got something to say?
No. The artist for Lancer does a webcomic I quite like.
Yeah, so you see that there's a note over there.
Yeah.
This is Lancer, which is a cool mech game in a space future with lots of thoughts about communism and fascism and politics, and I'm not going to get into that right now because
Other detailed diatribe, Marxism, why it's good.
I'll do it. See if I won't. But the artist for this is the artist for Kill 6 Billion Demons, which I know precisely one thing about. The artist for Kill 6 Billion Demons is the artist for Lancer.
Tautologist.
So do you want to soapbox about that for a bit, Red?
Kill 6 Billion Demons is one of the best looking webcomics I've ever seen. The art in it is absolutely gorgeous. The plot is very, very complicated, and it's been going for a while, so you might need to like reread from the beginning a couple times to remember everything that's happening. It doesn't look like any other webcomic, and that's a compliment. You know, I always really respect anybody who's doing something that nobody else is doing. It's a mechs game.
Yeah.
It's about mechs.
Yeah, specifically mechs fighting each other. Because,
heck
I
yeah.
mean...
What else are you gonna do with a giant mech?
I mean, you could, like, stand around and yell about ideology for a while. As I understand...
What is this, Gundam?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think that's what happens in Gundam. I don't actually know. I haven't watched Gundam. I've got a lot of friends who watch Gundam because it's doing, like, a gay one this time, and, you know...
Of course. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. To tell the truth, I'm not really a mech person. I love Lancer as a game, but the mech bits are like the bit where I'm like, it's whatever. I have a lot of friends, especially people who I know from Lancer, who have very different opinions about mechs, but I don't listen to them enough to be able to repeat their points, so yeah.
We're just gonna talk about the mechanics.
Yes.
Okay.
Essentially, a big focus on Lancer's fight mechanics is on positioning. There's cover rules that are important enough because there's a lot of guns on mechs and whatnot, so it's like, hey, hide behind a rock so you don't get shot. But then there's also like, well, we need you to get to here to like download the data thing we need to steal before we get hit by a bomb. This is a thing that a lot of games like this kind of expect you to have, but Lancer's one of the few games that actually says you should have it. Fights having specific codified objectives, in this case called sit reps. Here's a specific zone that we need you to hold and score for a while, or here's the escape zone, here's the enemies in between you and the zone, here's the timer before you all die. Have fun.
So it gives you a pretty strongly laid out, here's the objective, here's the time you have to do it, here are the threats, rather than like you walk into a 10 by 10 room, what's going on?
Yeah, exactly.
Because a lot of the best fights in like, you know, D&D and 5e, what I've played, are the ones where it's not just kill the NPCs, it's you have an objective and you have some constraint that's cleverly set out, and this game looks like it plays to exactly that.
Right. But the other thing about when that happens in D&D is that you can kind of tell that D&D isn't designed for that, because when GMs get clever and add things like environmental hazards, oftentimes the PCs will just take the path of least resistance and use the environmental hazards to kill their enemies, like in Escape the Bloodkeep, where every fight has falling as an instant fail condition, so all the players just start playing how much can we move the other characters until they fall, rather than just trying to actually...
leave OP.
Yeah, exactly.
And that is a thing that comes up in systems with like more codified, here's battlefield hazards, here's sit reps, and etc. Positioning control is a very powerful effect there, and some of the positioning control effects in Lancer are valued very highly for that. But also another part of that is that generally you don't want those hazards to be an instant kill thing.
Well, yeah, of course.
Yeah, but yeah, essentially this is one of those things I wanted to highlight as a neat thing Lancer does, but more than that, it's kind of a thing that sits within the space of common advice for ways to do things better in games with this kind of fight game format, but rarely do the games themselves actually tell you that or give you the tools for that, and Lancer is cool for actually doing that.
Nice.
And then we've got the other half of fight games, the not fighting half, which is building your build to actually have what it's got in fights. Because, you know, like I mentioned, the positioning control tools are valued highly. You've got a resource for how many control tools and support tools and whatnot you have. You got system points. And for guns, you've got limited weapon mounts. And you can pair those together. Like in this case, I've got an example of some things. Here is an auxiliary weapon. If you can see on the aux mount, that means you can get two of them. This sets the target on fire. Then you slap a shock wreath mod on it, which means you've applied a power that sets them on fire more. And then if they're already on fire, like from that weapon you just threw, they're suddenly blind, which is extremely strong in this game because you need line of sight to do anything. And it's just, you can't see beyond adjacent spaces. And then you can compare that with the talents, which are another space of, hey, here's a cool thing that you have, to then throw even more knives. And that's how you set a lot of things on fire.
All right, Yu-Gi-Oh! Burn deck user.
Okay.
Way to
and
I was
show
gonna
your
say, it
ass.
feels like Yu-Gi-Oh! Synergies or like Slay the Spire, where the whole point is not just to chip away at doing damage, it's to set up these ridiculous combat
Combos,
chains
yeah.
where you end up getting a situation where you do one move and everyone just atomizes instantly because you've set everything up
Yeah,
perfectly.
And that is the kind of thinking you want to get into when you're building your mech. One thing I'll say Lancer is good at is making it so that you can't really do like insta-win combos. The enemies are designed completely differently from players. They're very interesting, but also, this was a bit I'm gonna get to a bit later. All the player side content for Lancer is free. Only the GM needs to have the GM side content because it's completely different, which is why I'm not showing the NPCs because they look completely different and like that costs money and whatnot. But the NPCs are designed to have like one contained loop of like, this is my one gimmick, and then they're strong for that one gimmick, but disposable. And Lancer PCs usually can have like 2 to 3 gimmicks that they do just as strong as a devoted NPC would, and then a bit more miscellany.
That is a very fun inversion of the way D&D 5e handles this. Because not to constantly compare everything to D&D, but that is kind of the point here. We are sort of trying to be like, hey, if you like TTRPGs, but D&D isn't quite doing it for you,
Here's some other things.
what are things that these things can do that D&D can't? Because in D&D 5e, boss enemies have things like legendary resistances and legendary actions, where there's a lot of stuff that they can do and they all recharge. So basically, they can't just be taken out in one shot, so the villain can usually do significantly more than the players can. The fact is, like, D&D 5e is better about giving players more things to do in combat, you know, different moves, different feats, different synergies with different abilities. But practically speaking, once you've used your action, your bonus action, and your reaction, if you have one, you're out of luck, and if you don't have a useful bonus action or reaction at the time, you're basically just, you know, you use your turn to, like, move or hit something. And then the bad guy is doing, like, 8 things per round, and it feels like the player is a significantly more good at one thing archetype than the villain is. I think this is an interesting strength of this system, that they completely turn that on its head.
Yeah, there is a specific template for the enemies that essentially makes them like a big boss with things like, kind of like legendary actions, but it's just they get a second turn in the round. But I think the coolest thing about it is that fundamentally that height of power, other than getting the second turn and like having some things that are like you can be immune to the specific thing as optionals, the strongest it can be is as strong as a PC. Because all the players have, wait, I touched on this in another slide, I think.
That is part of the joy of the detail diatribe is your interlocutor sniping ideas out from under you before you get to that slide.
Yeah.
So all the PCs in Lancer have 4 health bars. Technically 8, because they have heat health bars and damage health bars. Yeah, it kind of plays like with some similar thoughts from BattleTech, but it makes that more like how HP works. The enemies have 1 health bar, where if you take it out, they're gone. The big boss template that I mentioned gives them 4 health bars. So the big, bulkiest, strongest things are just as tanky as a PC is. And the reason for that is that PCs have to worry about attrition, because you're not doing 1 fight in a mission, you're doing the expected numbers like 3 to 4, sometimes 2. Sometimes you can do more, but you want to be careful with that unless your players are really stomping things. And whenever you lose a health bar, you get an extra wallop of a bad thing happening, which I've got this table here. The 4 health bars is actually just like a trick to lie about how much health you have, because it's actually just take your base health bar, multiply it by 4, and it's like a brain trick thing to make the players go, oh, I'm in more danger than I am, which is smart. The structure damage is another way to make that relevant, because if you actually get that health bar break, you might then lose a weapon and you need to spend another repair to fix it, or you might get stunned, which eats an entire round out of you, which is rough.
This is interesting.
Now, here's why this is genius, is because Noir, from Rolling with Difficulty, we did a campaign where he was DMing just among our personal friends, and he had a system very similar to this built into D&D. I think it was that if you lost more than half of your health in a single attack, you rolled a d10 or something, and you took from a table a certain amount of like bad things that can happen to you. You take a level of exhaustion instantly, or up to the most extreme cases, you lose an eye or like a limb or something like that. So he had homebrewed this system where taking big increments of damage has significant consequences in the mechanics of the fight and in potentially the RP afterwards. And this just builds that right in from the jump.
Yeah.
So that is super cool.
One thing I like about that is that they've successfully gamified a thing that happens in mecha anime all the time. Because the thing is, when all your main characters are or squishy people, there's only so much you can fuck them up in the long term. Someone might lose an eye if they're going to be cool looking in the future. Someone might lose an arm and get a sick robot arm. These things happen. But like, that's a big thing, and you can't do that too many times. But in mecha shows, especially like anime, the way that you show everything's gone to shit is the robot gets completely destroyed, and then it has to be rebuilt. This is always like a big moment, but like, you can have like multiple limbs get ripped off in an episode, or like a core breach, or like, oh my robot's not responding, I have to get out and shoot my gun at them, like Pacific Rim or Code Geass style. And I like that that's just built in. Like, if you take a serious hit, you are expecting that your mech is going to be fucked up, because that's just what happens in the media that this is clearly trying to build mechanics for.
That's good game design.
Good game design!
Absolutely.
I'm amazing it took us this long to get there.
I had to save it. I can't just spend it in the first 5 minutes of the detailed diatribe.
There it is, yeah.
One of the interesting extra things about that is, because I mentioned there's the specific health bars, you only take the structure damage when you break a health bar. There's an action you can take that lets you spend a repair to immediately heal to full health in your current health bar. So if you get dropped down to like 1 or 2, burning that action might hurt, but the structure damage is an extra incentive to be like, well, either I spend a repair and an action to heal now, or I spend the repairs to heal the structure and I spend my action being stunned. Ouch. And that's one of the things that Lancer in play is very good at, making players suddenly go, oh no, I have to drop my sick game plan to worry about this, or I don't drop my sick game plan and I then get smashed up a bit. I always do the second. I recommend you do the same. Sensibility is for cowards.
Especially if you're trying to tell a dramatic narrative where maybe your Gundam explodes. I'm just saying, like...
Yeah, whoever heard of a protagonist in a dramatic mech narrative being sensible? And so, yeah, so now we kind of get to, the Lancer fights are really rad. Lancer non-fights don't really have much more to them than D&D non-fights, in that there's a skill check system, and that's kind of it. There is a bit more. They've got specific downtime actions. Here I've given an example of the funniest one, which does not help at all because it's just going and getting a drink and getting problems.
You just decide whether you had a good time or not?
Yeah.
Oh, but you might get like a friend or like a thing.
And you might lose a friend or a thing.
Oh, God.
Yeah, see.
Oh, you have to choose between your dignity, your memory, and all of your possessions?
Yeah, see, like, it's
What?
funny.
That's great.
Yeah,
No, I love that.
I want to be clear, all the other downtime actions are like useful and like get you cool stuff, or like you work on a cool project. This is the fun one. It mentions getting things as reserves. A reserve is a only somewhat codified mechanic of, hey, here, have like a cool power that you can use inside the mission to like blast an enemy or something.
I'm just trying to figure out how you can end up with a gutter without your possessions or your memory, but with your dignity intact.
Because you won a really cool fist fight on your way out of the bar.
Oh, that's probably, yeah, like you go back to the bar and everyone's like, hey, it's the hero of the hour, you totally single-handedly bested those 50 guys, and you're like, that does sound like me. Anyone know where my wallet is? I need to check my driver's license for what my name is. Oh, this looks new.
Yeah, and
This is
I
too...
love the title.
God damn it, man. We're never gonna get through all 70 of these.
don't worry. We probably won't.
Fucking strongly worded YouTube comments for this one.
Yeah, so this game is called Wyrdwood Wand, and it is a magic school game. Note the note in the top right. A magic school game is kind of underselling it. There was like an alien invasion, and like they didn't have magic, but they had like cool laser beams and like biotech, and they messed up the world real bad. But we did have wizards, so like there was like a desperate wizard suicide mission that blew them up, and now they've got like some stragglers there, but the world is recovering from horrifying alien invasion. Also, there's VTubers on the moon. There's weird stuff in the setting, but it's rad.
I'm not gonna let you speed by VTubers on the moon.
What do you mean?
Who are the VTubers? Are they aliens or wizards?
Okay, so...
Wait, hold on. I just remembered we have a timetable and 62 more slides to go.
And on that note, I'm zooming by before you get a chance to reconsider.
Okay.
Play the game to learn for yourself.
Yeah! Find out what the fuck those VTubers are doing on the moon.
And as you might notice, similar story to Lancer. Big fighting mechanics, and you've got, hey, let's build your gimmick together so that you can do some nonsense in fights. In this case, instead of building a mech, you're learning a bunch of spells because it's a wizard school, and you learn magic. In this case, for instance, the examples skills I picked out are learning magic to hurt yourself a bunch for no reason.
You fool, now neither of us have health bars.
Unlike Lancer, this game has some more stuff for things that aren't fights. There are, alongside spells specifically for combat, there's a separate category of spells that you unlock with like a different number of them for spells that specifically aren't used in combat, which is, to do my own bring up of D&D 5e, that's kind of a thing that happens with spellcasters in D&D 5e, except only spellcasters get it, and they don't differentiate which pool is which, so you have to like balance which mode you want to be useful at and which mode you don't, which is not great, which is why this just splits them up. Some of those narrative powers aren't for ruining people's lives, but I think you're getting a sense of my taste by now.
So you brought up how a lot of these games are essentially clearly derived from, hey, let's take D&D 4th edition and like change it.
Yes.
And I feel like with these two specifically, I look at this and I'm like, if you're telling an urban fantasy story and you want to explain how the mysterious wizard mentor can knock out all the cell phones so that nobody can film it, or if you want to explain how one of the students cursed another student and now this weird thing is happening, you can actually put in mechanics for that. Because sometimes in D&D you run into narrative things where it's like, I want this thing to happen in story, but there's literally no justification in the rules for it to happen that way, even though it feels like there could be, and so I have to fake something or make something up. And this feels like almost a response to that, because these are two cinematic decisions.
That is one of the big things with the narrative spells in this one. They're called rights. And actually, I wanted to thank you for bringing that up. Of the fight games, this one hews the closest to D&D 4e. If you recognize like the power formatting, some powers are like, oh, roll your weapons damage dice and whatnot. There's a lot of things that are specifically, this was how D&D 4e did it, and this is a more refined version of that. Lancer is also like very directly derived from that, but it goes like a bit further away with how it does things. But this game, as I understand it, if you have spent time with D&D 4e, you will be able to be like, oh yeah, this is pretty familiar.
Oh wait, I think I heard about this.
Oh, that's interesting. Some of the games on this list are ones that I know are pretty popular in indie spaces, and I expected some of them to hear about. Kind of surprised you've heard of this one, though.
I have no idea where I've heard of this. I think a video game came out that is similar to this in vibes. Blue, you might be able to help me out with this.
Yeah, I'm trying to place it.
You got it
saw
too.
the art and I'm like, oh, that looks familiar.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I couldn't tell you.
So this is a fight game through and through, in that it's about cool anime street fights, and all the examples I had were video games. I at least should have thought of, like, there's like Full Metal Alchemist and Avatar on there, and when I was writing this, I was
Dragon
like,
Ball.
Yeah, and when I was writing this, I was like, teehee, I've played Yakuza. I haven't played Yakuza. I don't know what I was doing.
Dragon Ball is like the shallowest pull you could have done for anime fighting thing.
Yeah, listen, I have no excuse. I'm sorry. More fighting and building. In this case, they do something that the other two haven't done so much, where you build different stances by combining a form and a style, and then you don't stick in one for a fight. You swap between them from round to round, and those give you different move sets and abilities. You build each one as its own tool set, and then you jump between them based on what tool set you need. This one is not like 4E derived anywhere near as much as the others, in that it doesn't have similar mechanics to that. Like, the other two are D20 systems.
Yeah, this looks completely different.
The action dice are like the super interesting thing. Each form gives you a pool of dice that you roll at the start of your turn, and those give you values, and you spend the value you roll on that to use a power. So like if you roll the D6 and get a 5, you can spend that on 4 plus Whirlwind, because 5 is 4 or greater, and then you use Whirlwind, and you just spend your dice on that until you're out of dice, and that's your thing.
So I note with that one it says 1 up, so I assume you can slide in anytime you want?
That means you spend a die with a value of 1 or higher.
You can always spend a die on that, but the other one is a little bit luck of the dice?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I like that. And of course it's the teleports behind you move that you can do whenever you want.
Absolutely.
Like, again, if you're trying to gamify a story with tropes in it, you need to make it so that the tropes are supported by the dice.
Yep, and it's still fundamentally a thing where what it wants you to do is it wants you to look at the mechanical things and look for weird combos, like 1-2 gives you an extra hit of damage when you hit someone for damage, and vampire style, whenever you deal damage, you heal. So you get an extra heal with every hit because you hit them again.
That is exactly the right kind of anime bullshit.
Exactly.
Because you can just imagine one of the sideline characters being like, oh, no way! Every time he injures his opponent, he gets stronger?
Yeah, it's great at anime bullshit.
Yay.
Actually, I lied. Here's where it's great about anime bullshit. How'd you like an army of shadow clones?
I do like armies of shadow clones. As a noted Shadow the Hedgehog fan, Big fan of clones of the Shadow variety, even the ones that explode.
I do think it's interesting that the way that the system works is it seems like you always have a move available to you,
I love
as opposed
that.
to D&D where it's like, I want to do this attack.
Yeah.
It misses. All right, fine. Catch you on the next turn.
Yeah, or even
This
like I'm a
seems
close
like-
range fighter and it's out of range, so I guess I'll move towards it and then hit it
Yeah.
maybe next round.
It seems like there, clearly moves that are more or less advantageous, but like even if you roll a 1, like you have a move that corresponds to rolling a 1.
Yeah.
And then you still have actions in your toolbox as opposed to just like, I'm trying to cast this spell and like one of these turns it's gonna hit, but until then all my turns are useless. So I like that. That makes it a lot more engaging.
Yeah, there's also, there are universal actions that everyone has access to, and those are also tied around, you can do them even with 1s, and the base actions generally follow, like, you can do this with 1, but they scale to higher based on the higher dice. That way, if you get, like, a really high number on a roll, if you've got a pool with, like, a d12 or something, if you have that, but you only have moves that are, like, 3+, like, you get a 9 and you're missing a lot of that. Using that for a basic attack is going to hit someone with a harder wallop than you could, so the basic actions are still a core part of your toolkit.
You know what this is kind of reminding me of in a loose sense? Like, it's higher up the cladogram than this. Champions. In terms of, like, I'm just looking at all, like, the abilities on this frame, and I'm like, they synergize together so well, and that's kind of how character building in Champions worked. It's like there was a long list of superpowers, and you could pick a subset of them, and that basically gave you the gimmick of your character. Because in this case, it's like, oh, you got Spirit Style where you can clone yourself, and you got Crystal Style where you can clone yourself more, and then you have Shadow Form where you can teleport around, and it's like, okay, so you're making yourself the stock ninja bad guy that everybody fights in episode 3 of their
Yeah.
respective thingy, but each of these individually you could use for something else. Like the
Yeah.
Crystal Style, you could use that to be like, my gimmick is mirrors and crystals and illusions.
Exactly. And again, as I mentioned, you get multiple stances that are combined by these. So like you can be a stock ninja with teleporting clones 1 second, and then like the next round you swap to a completely different thing where you're like too cool to die, so even if you're at 0 HP, you're still punching and the enemies need to take out all of your allies or you just don't go down.
Wait, power of friendship is
Yes.
a power? Yes!
That class is called the Punk, and it's great.
I'm so happy.
Yeah.
Love it.
I
With
also
my friends by my side, I literally can't lose. Just go
Yeah, it's
down
great.
already. I feel like, not to again just continue joining the JoJo punching down on D&D scene that we've established here, but I think that there's a fairly common frustration that people run into when they're playing D&D, which is like, oh man, this would be so narratively satisfying and cool and cinematic, but I rolled badly, so instead I fell on my face, and the cool thing didn't happen, and it's just like, that's tragic and unfortunate. It would have been nice if that didn't happen, but luck of the dice anyway. And I kind of like how, again, it's kind of indicative of like, that's not the only way this has to work. You can also have a situation where the narratively cool thing does happen every time when you figure out how to make it work, rather than, all right, let's figure out the cool thing and we'll flip this coin, and if it comes up heads, the cool thing happens, and if it comes up tails, it doesn't.
I think there is something to be said for stakes in a game where there is a genuine chance that things can just go wrong.
Yeah.
There's- Even though it is mechanically unsatisfying, it can make the narrative more compelling because there actually is like the possibility you can't save someone because you rolled wrong, and you kind of have to like build that into the narrative and kind of like post hoc justify it. But I'll come to bat for like things being able to go wrong because
Yeah.
of bad rolls.
No, it's a trade-off.
So this is one of the things that I have the most thoughts on, but we are on slide 13 of 71, so I'm gonna abbreviate it and say my general recommendation is that you absolutely want to have stakes on any like roll you make, but you also want every possible outcome of those stakes to be a thing that people would enjoy having for whatever value of enjoy there is. And if there isn't,
Yeah.
you need to pause and recontextualize that roll. And I'm gonna get to that
Oh
much
yeah,
later.
like failing forward.
Yeah.
Where it's
Yeah.
like, look, whatever happens, it should, something should be happening. It's like, oh, I need to pick this lock, and if you fail, the lock doesn't get picked, but we need to pick the
Yeah.
lock for the plot to happen. It's like, okay, well, you picked the lock, but you rolled really badly, so you fuck up your thieves' tools, or like, something gets jammed in it, or it, sets off an alarm or something.
But in all of those cases, you also still have to have a way forward that's not picking the lock.
yeah.
If picking the lock is the only way for the story to happen, you just pick the lock.
Yeah, that's basically what I mean. Like, if you have to pick the lock for the story to progress, failing to pick the lock should not be an option. But you can make it so that the failure condition of that situation still includes picking the lock.
Yeah, anyway, so I've talked this system up a lot, but I do want to mention a few downsides. This has the least non-combat mechanics of of any of these. There's the examples of like the Shadow Walker thing from Shadowform. That's all the narrative mechanics there are.
You can just be fully invisible.
Yeah, it's like you get a power that lets you do things, and if you don't have an applicable power that lets you do things, you comedically fail on your way to get to the next fight, and then you get to the next fight. If you have a power that lets you do the thing, you get to the next fight stylishly, and then you're at the next fight. That's kind of it. Another thing I want to note that I think is neat, but I know is definitely a thing that a lot of people kind of balk at. There is no progression system for this game. You get your character, and it's like, here's a strong character, and that's it. And for some people, that's just gonna be rough to make a campaign out of. I've heard it called one of the best one-shot games out there, which is fair. I think it makes a really good one-shot. I also think it makes a pretty good campaign, but I know that for a lot of people, that's gonna hit them a bit.
Right.
I also wanted to comment one last note for the folks who were looking at the previous slides and going, yo, this game design looks great. I will recommend the game Dicey Dungeons on Steam, which is a roguelike game with a lot of very cool ideas. I'll also not recommend replaying it because in my experience, it completely flattens out after the first run, but basically play it to the point of succeeding at once and like try out the other characters and look at the dice mechanics, and your brain is probably really gonna go abuzz. It hits a lot of the same like cool thoughts regarding dice that this system does, and I think it's real neat.
Okay.
So now we've reached the next section where things are gonna work a lot differently. This is games derived on the very ominously named Apocalypse engine.
Yes.
It's called that because it's derived from a game called Apocalypse World, which is set in a post-apocalypse. To pull back and reveal some of my intentions a bit, part of the reason that I highlighted the fight systems first and their similarities and comparisons to D&D 5e is because I think for a lot of people with thoughts on D&D 5e as a game, they'll go like, oh yeah, I can see that, like you guys did.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people with time with 5e, they'll be like, wait, what? That's not what I'm there for at all. I want to highlight that because I think that's a very common experience for how D&D is advertised, both in like explicit advertising and just in terms of how people talk about it. It gets told as an engine for telling cool tropey stories. And, you know, I mean, you guys were talking about some of the earlier games as that, and they are if you're centralizing the fights as the big set pieces and focuses of those cool stories. But if they aren't, and a lot of the time in how I hear 5e talked about it isn't, the games fundamentally aren't great choices for that. So I wanted to talk about Powered by the Apocalypse games for a bit because they are some of the most literal engines of tropey storytelling that I have ever encountered, and I think that's really neat.
I'm curious.
So to start with an example, here is a game called Worldwide Wrestling, which is about wrestling, which I could not think of a better example of tropey storytelling than that, especially because it starts playing with the metafiction where you're not just playing the wrestlers, you're playing the actors of the wrestlers and their real life politics and how that messes with the wrestling.
Fun fact,
Oh, wow.
TV Tropes was originally created for wrestling tropes.
Oh, that's amazing.
That's why there are so many niche wrestling terms that are just tropes, like face heel turn and heel face turn.
Awesome.
Heels and faces are wrestling terms.
So the base unit of Powered by the Apocalypse play is a move. Powered by the Apocalypse is the term for a game. Yeah. Essentially, a move is when X narrative thing happens, do Y thing, which usually has the format of roll 2d6, add a modifier, and then check this chart for things. And like we were talking about failing forward, all of the results are this is how the story gets pushed forward.
Sorry, I'm just looking at that break kayfabe thing.
Oh yeah, that is like a big centerpiece of this because this is a game about wrestlers and the people behind the wrestlers and how they relate to that and the issues that come up there. Breaking kayfabe is like a big thing.
Yeah, this feels like essentially the mechanical writer's room behind what would be a classic story.
That's absolutely the idea. It's trying to automate the progression of tropes.
Impressive.
Yeah, it's really neat. The other piece of the puzzle is that every character has their own playbook, which is essentially their like archetype in the narrative, which is going to give them their own tropes based on how they relate to it. And so you have every character with their own tropey archetype that defines how they relate to the world and how the world relates to them. And then the basic moves are the rules of how the world overall relates to it and base mechanical interactions of that. And that's the baseline of a Powered by the Apocalypse game. Here's another example playbook where your job is to lose so that other people look cool. Specifically, the playbooks here are your job for the wrestling. How the person behind that feels about that is going to affect how they interact with it, but fundamentally, their job and the role the narrative casts for them is going to define how they interact with the wrestling.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, as far as Powered by the Apocalypse games go, this one's super cool for playing into the metafiction of wrestling, and it's like, that's rad.
I like that it's just like the jobber always loses. That's the point. But, you know, outside of the fights, what's actually going on?
Oh yeah, a lot of politics about who's scripted to win the fight and how and what happens when you flub that and someone else wins the fight are a big part of the game. For instance, here are the move rules for how to actually do the wrestling, and sometimes you can accidentally or intentionally go, screw this, I want to win instead.
Ah, the old Daredevil's dad move.
Yeah, but of course, that's not fitting the narrative, and like, your in-character wrestler persona isn't going to say, the boss's script me to lose, but I didn't, because that's not part of the narrative of wrestling. So it's the wrestler character that is the person making that decision, and it's like, ooh. This is an actual post-apocalypse game, so it also fits the thing, but I wanted to highlight it for doing something very weird and interesting with the Powered by the Apocalypse engine, now that you see the basics, because you are not playing as people in this. You're playing as factions in a post-apocalypse game and dealing with negotiations and treaties and power and the world falling apart and some of that being your fault and a lot of that being your fault.
It's like a settlement builder thing.
Yeah, it's a settlement builder, but instead of mechanizing a settlement builder per se, instead of making like a tabletop 4X game, it's making a tabletop game that follows the tropes of stories of settlements and of 4X games. 4X game is just like the term for civilization. I don't know. It's like for something, but I think it's like...
It's explore, expand, exploit, and like kill. I don't... Exterminate? I'm not entirely
probably.
sure. Yeah.
That makes sense. So it's 4 EXs.
Yeah, but...
Okay, sure.
And yeah, the playbooks are all like specific thematic. Here's your faction gimmick, like...
Uh-oh.
Yeah, how'd you like to be the gang of murder AIs?
Well, who doesn't love a good murder robot?
Exactly. And they're hanging out in the post-apocalypse, and I mean, it's not like the apocalypse is great for them, but also like they're gonna be rough for the other faction to deal with, which are the other players. I did lie a bit. Yeah, you do actually, in every era, you all play one particular character that is going on an adventure group with the characters from the other ones, and then you go do the thing that changes the era based on how you succeed or fail, and like if the nanite plant explodes and the others in nanite swarm to deal with or whatnot.
Right, of course.
I'll be honest, this part is fine, but it's the least interesting part of this system. The faction stuff is really cool. Obviously, like, I recommend playing the whole shebang because you get to have, like, the cool character adventures that I know a lot of people expect from RPGs, and all the faction stuff works as, like, setting building and overarching, here's the politics in play, now let's set a specific adventure and do that. But the faction building and the setting connection stuff are the coolest mechanical parts of the game and the coolest unique things that it does itself.
I think it's a bold choice to have an RPG that is, at least for the most part, abstracted from role-playing individual characters, because there seems to be like such a disconnect between playing like a regular board game and doing an RPG, and having a game that like kinda bridges that a little bit, I find very interesting.
Yeah, this is like blurring the line between this and like any given tabletop civilization builder, tile-based, you know.
Yeah.
Because I find when I'm playing an RPG, I would actually rather be playing a board game.
Well, of course you would.
It seems very cool for me being that kind of person.
The extra neat thing about this is that it's doing things that you can't necessarily do when making a board game, because it's about, like, it does some really neat things with the specific diplomatic interactions based on abstracted needs and surpluses and, like, filling out the map that if it was an explicit codified map with specific, here's how many tokens of needs and surpluses you have versus the abstraction, you'd get a fundamentally different texture and you'd be more more concerned with the granularity than you would with the overall politicking. And that's great for wanting to focus on that granularity, and games like that rule. The other big factor is that it's politicking over time. So after every age, depending on how well you did and how lucky you get, good things are gonna happen, bad things are gonna happen. The characters you played in the adventure are gonna retire, and the next time you go out on an adventure, you're gonna be playing different folks. You gotta update the map by adding new good or bad things that happen, and most of the factions are probably gonna have a rough time of it based on it being an apocalypse, but that depends on how well they did, and how well they did can often come at messing with the others, so they'll have a bad time, and then that shapes the future eras.
It looks like the player has a lot of control over what exactly happens.
Absolutely.
So it's not like, pick from this table. It's just like, all right, here's the gist. Mm-hmm. I like that. This feels like a storytelling tool rather than a game.
Yeah, so that's kind of one of the things about Powered by the Apocalypse games overall and other games in this vein. They'll all have a sidebar that I've read frequently enough to have my own angry opinions about that I won't share, but
Okay, sure.
they'll have a sidebar about approach this game as though it's a conversation. Essentially, just go back and forth talking about what happens in the story, just like, yeah, and then this happens, and then that happens, and when you hit a point where you hit a trigger for one of the moves or one of the effects or something, you resolve that to see what happens next.
Huh. Yeah, I think you really need a specific table for that.
Yes, games like this I think are really neat. You need a good table for any game. You need a table that can mesh with the specific headspace of that game for any game, and that's very true of these. It's very true of the fight games. It's going to be true of all of the
Well,
types
yeah, of course.
Yeah. One thing I want to note, Powered by the Apocalypses, there are a lot of them out there, and a lot of them are shovelware. That's gonna sound mean, but like, a lot of them are made by people who are new to design, which I think it's good to support people doing new things, but might be rough around the edges. A lot of them are made by people who are just copying the formula from another game and not considering how to adapt it to their own concept. Those are pretty rough. Most of the big name ones you'll be able to find that people have played a lot are probably gonna be pretty good and do some interesting things. I'm an advocate for looking for niche games overall, but Powered by the Apocalypses especially became such a big fashion and such a big trend that so many people made them that I recommend taking a critic's eye to them when you look at them, more so than I recommend doing that all the time. I do recommend doing that all the time, but for these ones especially, I recommend.
So this is kind of like the equivalent of 2D side-scrollers made in Unity?
Yeah.
Okay.
Where like some of them
Yeah.
are really neat, and you want to look
Sometimes
at
you
the
get
neat
an
ones.
Ori and the Blind Forest, and most of the time you get a bunch of Super Mario clones.
Kinda, yeah.
All right, cool.
And this is not a Powered by the Apocalypse, but it is a game derived from the format of it and with a similar role structure, and you may very well recognize it. It spawned a movement of its own like that.
That's always how it works. Somebody does something brand new, and then 5 million people are like, oh, that gives me so many ideas.
Essentially, yeah.
Now that they did the hard work, I can draw this out to its own various
I can just
conclusions.
coast, baby.
Yeah, but also it's like cool Dishonored vibes and like a city
obviously.
surrounded by ghosts and a lightning shield to repel the ghosts. It rules. This game has a fantastic aesthetic.
Love it.
These have playbooks like Powered by the Apocalypse games do. They're the specialty for your role in a cool heist because you're a crew of heisting criminals. Yeah, basically, if you've ever played Dishonored and wanted it to be leveraged, this is a cool game for you. However,
Hit her,
there,
stab
yeah.
her.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Mastermind.
it's literally cutter.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are some notable differences in tone that I touch on a bit later, but essentially, that's the concept. Each playbook will give you cool powers and items and basic skills, which are kind of like moves, but they're less automated fiction than Powered by the Apocalypse are, and they're closer to just, here's a narrative power you can use to shape things. So it's kind of like a bit closer to the D&D-esque expectation of how you look at your powers and then how you look at the world. They're tools for navigating it. One thing that makes us kind of less leveragey is that you do want to be fucking up the characters a lot. And, it's like, so imagine everyone's Elliot.
Right, so it's not competence porn, basically. The
Yeah.
characters need to lose and take a few hits.
You're not a group of overcompetent, I'm going to win at this types. You're struggling to rob
gritty
rich people in like
Dickensian orphans turned street thugs.
Yeah, one reason for that is every player character has has a resource called stress that they use to just go, no, I don't want to deal with that when the GM hits them with consequences for their actions. So you have a limited just, actually, I'm gonna be fine. And you don't like get all your stress back at the end of the mission. You have to go indulge in a vice like gambling or alcohol or other more unsavory ones that I'm not gonna talk about.
Okay.
What? I'm a prude, so help me.
This is, I like the overindulgence table, including the one where your character gets lost and you have to play another one for a little while.
Yeah, they're off on a bender.
Oh, but they do heal completely.
Yeah,
So you can just make a little, like, secondary, like, one-off character until your character comes back completely fine.
Yeah.
Well-rested and tanned from their visit to the Bahamas.
Yeah, their actor was, like, off that week, so they had to record
They
some...
had, like, maternity leave or something, so...
Exactly. Okay, so
Oh, boy.
this is one of the things that people popped off so hard for Blades in the Dark about. And like everyone loves these so much. Every indie game designer is gonna be like, oh yeah, clocks are great. And I really just cannot highlight how much they are just a progress bar turned into a circle. They're great and they're useful because progress bars are useful, but I don't understand.
Game designers actually just magpies.
Listen,
Oh,
I'm no
boy.
better. I think clocks rule too. And I mean, I think these are useful to track for when you want to set up like a narrative concept and you're like, I don't want this to happen now. So I'll just say, oh, it's getting closer. I better worry about that. It's very useful to use progress bars to track things, and circles are more space efficient than bars, but everyone just pops off so much about these. It's
Me when I'm in a symbolism competition with a ticking clock.
But yeah, if you see clocks from anywhere, the Blades is the big, like, hey, here's clocks.
Love it.
So, one thing that I want to note about this game's take on heist media is that it doesn't like the phase where people sit around planning. And I think that's fair. I'm the type who will love to sit down, draw, like, a detailed, ridiculous plan with a lot of horrible faults and terrible ideas in
Yeah,
it.
you will.
But that's not what Blades is trying to do. It wants for like the cool cinematic type thing, and in that case, it pretty much is similar to how Leverage. I lost the name.
It's
To how-
literally on the frame.
I can't read. To how Leverage will do it.
Yeah.
Because, you know, Leverage will do like, oh, let's cut to with like the filter over it to back
Get a
when
f-
Parker
a
nudged the guy
flashback
where
to-
they
yeah.
planted like the tracking bug on their key card or whatever. So you have flashbacks as a limited resource so that you can go, oh, actually, I thought to befriend this particular NPC right before we got here, so now they're useful to us instead of a danger, or etc., etc.
I mean, this ties in with a trope / just principle of storytelling, which is showing the same thing twice over is boring. So showing people planning a thing and then showing the plan executed flawlessly is not fun.
Yeah.
Because you already know what's going to happen. But which is why there's a thing in trope space is called the unspoken plan guarantee, where if the characters are like, all right, this is what we're gonna do, and then it cuts away, and then they're doing the plan, but we don't know what the plan is going to succeed until somebody explains what the plan is, at which point that part of the plan will fail.
Yep.
So I like that this game is like, you figure this out in the past, now tell me what it is. Why are you here, and how is this actually all according to Keikaku?
And you can avoid having parts of the plan to deal with for contingencies that didn't happen. And also, one other very big component of this game is that you've got faction rules, kind of like Legacy, but still more focused on your particular character as important than Legacy, but it's still got like, hey, you've got factions with limited resources, there's like a whole territory map you need to claim, and there's unease with other factions around. One of the core principles of the game, every section of the city is owned by someone, which means every bit of area you try to claim, somebody's gonna be pissed that you want it now, and you're gonna have to deal with them one way or another.
This is very Six of Crows. I like it.
Pretty much, yeah. All of those crew types have their own playbooks, also like Legacy. Those playbooks determine the map of the things they're going to claim. It also determines what kind of jobs you're going to be doing, in this case going out and murdering people, which is fun. And it also determines what faction powers you can unlock through progress, including contacts and just useful things for the missions. This is, I would say, the second direction that makes Blades in the Dark, I'm not sure if I have a non-mean way to phrase this.
That's okay.
More than just an engine for heist storytelling.
Ah.
Like, the system before that works fine for just doing that, and that's what it's there for. This system sets up the longer-term arc of what's going to be going on between things. This is the Damien Moreau, except if, like, that was actually what that season was, and they didn't just forget about it immediately.
So this is the overarching plot line for the series of heists.
Yes.
Okay. We don't need to reference niche John Crime Man from Leverage Season 3.
Wait, what? You have something against John Crime, the inventor of crime?
No, I'm a big fan of John Crime, inventor of crimes. I'm just saying not everybody has seen Leverage, regrettably.
Watch Leverage.
Thank you. This is really rewarding for me, because normally I'm that person.
Right, you don't even have to do the work this time. You just like think the thought, and then
Is this what a
out of
pyramid
your own
scheme is
sibling's
like?
mouth is the idea.
Yeah.
This is, as I mentioned, Blades in the Dark spawned a lot of games like it. This is one of those that I think is really good. The abbreviation here, Forge in the Dark. Gamers love abbreviations. They love abbreviations that you need to memorize. At least it's not like the word Metroidvania. They could be so much worse.
You're
It could
telling
be like...
me you don't like Pibta? Or Fitda?
I'm telling you that you can tell that game designers usually communicate to one another in text. Okay, so the premise of this one is that it is a D&D pastiche, but you play the gremlin-y monsters inside of a dungeon. As before, you've got playbooks for your specific role and how that affects things. You've got vices, which are your impulses to evil. You've got downtime that you need to manage and clocks and whatnot. Mechanically, it's quite similar to Blades in the Dark, so it'll be a lot like what you saw before, but geared for a different premise. And it's also similar heisting, but instead of a heist, it's going out to raid the surface world, then coming back, then the surface world goes and attacks your cool dungeon, and you have to deal with that. The crew side is the dungeon. The gimmick of the dungeon is the crew playbook, so like, here's an example of like, hey, how'd you like to be like the Forge dungeon with like lava pools that are actually molten metal and then like
hell
robots
yeah.
and such.
Nobody can find a better source of inspiration than Star Wars Episode 2.
Okay, are you gonna sass the...
No, it's
Wait,
good.
what happened in Star Wars Episode 2?
Not a lot.
Geonosis.
Yeah.
What? Wait, is
Obi-Wan
that the
does-
planet with the people, the necks?
Yeah, it's the neck people.
Okay.
The clones. Obi-Wan does everything, and then they all get kidnapped and dropped in an arena to have a boss fight.
All right. I can't believe you...
But they do briefly hang out in a factory with a lot of moving conveyor belts and pits of molten lava, and it feels like a completely different movie for about 10 minutes.
I can't believe you dissed the cinematic masterpiece of whatever it was you just said.
I like that this game basically is like, what if D&D was inverted into tower defense instead?
Yeah, essentially.
Goblins Tower Defense.
The crew side of the game is a bit more reactive than how Blades does things, where you're like, let's go out and rob someone or kill them or whatever, because we've got reason to do that. In this case, you go out and make a mess, and then you come back, and then it turns out that making a mess has consequences, and you need to deal with that. Same as Blades, you're gonna get walloped by some harsh consequences from the GM, and you're gonna stress it off, and then you're gonna go relieve that stress by indulging in your wicked impulse to cause more problems, which then means there's more problems to have consequences that you need to deal with, and it's like, oh hey, it's like a nice stable loop. The last one I want to highlight, Hardwired Island, is neither Powered by the Apocalypse nor Forged in the Dark, but in the same direct approach to gameplay of, like I was saying, it's got like the, hey, treat this game as a conversation sidebar and everything.
Right.
And the system is quite similar to how those work. It's a bit different, and it's also just really neat, so I wanted to talk about it.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, I'm bending my rules because I do what I want, and you can't stop me.
Oh, goody.
That's the power of the person who's in charge of the detail diatribe.
Yeah, if you control the who controls the slideshow controls the universe.
Yeah, so as you can see, pretty similar to Powered by the Apocalypse rolls in that you're rolling 2d6 and then adding a thing. In this case, you've just got two results, the success and the failure, which is whether you match or fail to match the difficulty. So you still get a similar if you succeed X, if you fail Y type thing, but a bit more the GM decides what the difficulty is, and the GM decides a bit more of what X and Y are. That might be more familiar to people used to, say, D&D skill checks and whatnot.
Right. You know what? This is not related at all, but I love the special fonts they come up with for the title cards of all of these games.
Oh, yeah, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, everything else is fucking, what, Ariel or Helvetica New?
Yeah.
But, like, the titles, they're always so fancy.
I mean, font is a huge way to distinguish the visual identity of your game, and when you're not, like, publishing a comic or, you know, something that is strongly visual, a lot of your character is conveyed through your rule books. So you gotta really double down on the graphic design and the font choices, because that's pretty much the visual that your players will be engaging with. So,
Yeah.
no, Red, you're right, but I also, like, you gotta, otherwise there's nothing for your players to grab onto.
Yeah, who's gonna fucking sign in for Times New Roman?
Playbooks are essentially your narrative specialty for how are you gonna go do cyberpunk things.
Influencer?
Yeah, you can be a terminally online influencer with parasocial relationships, and you can be a gamer with a verified account. This game rules.
I don't like this game anymore.
What do you mean?
It's called Content Creator, Magenta. We're content creators. Don't you slander us by calling us influencers.
Content creator is already a step down from artist, which is what we actually are. But whatever. I love the hot take ability.
It's great. The premise of this game is that it's anti-capitalist cyberpunk in space.
Oh, of course.
So you gotta like use your influencer powers to stop corporations from ruining your neighborhood any further.
Oh, yeah. As we all know, that's totally a thing.
Yeah, which is famously what you guys do with your jobs, which is why I respect you, right?
Oh, yeah. D-list internet celebrities is super good at political campaigning.
I do like the hierarchy we established where the game is like influencer, and I'm like, how dare you call us trash? We're recycling, and Red's like, wait, we're actually kind of useful.
Yeah. But whenever someone's like, oh, content creator, I'm like, oh yeah, a machine for churning out content, whatever that may be.
My favorite substance. It's like when one of those survival crafting games will be like, this is the generic cube you use to build things.
Oh yeah.
That's
yeah.
what content
This
is.
is resources.
Yeah, so this is a game about capitalism, so you're not gonna have a good time.
Wow, they are pulling absolutely no punches.
Yeah, the downtime format for this one is you have to deal with sudden economic problems and having your limited money stressed out.
Wow.
Yeah.
A little bit real.
Yeah, that's
Character's unlikely to have a lavish house. Ooh.
the true millennial cyberpunk fantasy.
A home isn't guaranteed. Yeah, no kidding.
Oh, yeah, also,
Oh no. Why'd you put the maid cafe thing in here?
What do you mean? Listen, I want people to know what they're getting into, okay? I think this game is rad, but also this game is very much, have you seen a millennial on the internet? Well, now you have.
Hold on, it's important that we read this out loud. The app's gimmick is that the maids wear cat ear headbands. Head Patter began as a maids cafe April Fool's gimmick before both the cafe and the app were bought out. Today the app is big enough that a Head Patter anime is due to come out sometime in 2022. God damn it.
I'll be honest, I really like this game. Part of the reason I included this was to make you two suffer.
Thanks. This
You're
feels
welcome.
like if someone was like, you know what Shadowrun needs? More cat girls.
I do like that this game has such a sense of tone and place that just from reading these descriptions, you immediately understand the vibe that the game wants you to have, whereas some games are a little more obscure, like what headspace am I supposed to be in when I'm playing this? I like that this game makes it abundantly clear exactly how you're supposed to play it.
Yep.
Yeah, it's got a very good sense of tone. It's well presented. All right.
Oh no!
So,
We've hit landmine number 1!
yeah, surprise.
Oh boy, here it comes.
Okay, so one thing that I want to highlight about the prior games that I mentioned, in their own ways, they are difficult to GM. Powered by the Apocalypse and Forged in the Dark games and whatnot, put a lot of strain on your capacity for improv. You need to be on the ball for following the narrative, being able to follow, okay, here's what to do next in the narrative, especially for the Forged in the Dark and Hardwired Island and whatnot. Deciding what the success and failure conditions are going to be and how to make them interesting is rough if you're not used to it. And even for Powered by the Apocalypse ones, in some cases it's like, hey, have a bad thing happen or put a hard choice on them, and it's like, okay, you gotta be on the ball to have an interesting idea for that actually helps, which is not an easy skill at all. It's very fun if you can get yourself used to it. It's also very draining even if you are used to it. that's kind of a different dynamic to the fight games, where there's a lot of GM work that they take as well, but they take it in the prep phase outside of session. You need to build interesting maps, interesting enemy composition, interesting fights for said maps with interesting objectives. You also need to have interesting success and failure states for those fights so that however it goes interestingly. In the middle of combat, you've got a lot more stuff to juggle than the players will have. It's tough. It's very rewarding work. Those games are incredibly fun, but it's tough and it takes a lot of experience to get better at, and these are very hard kinds of games to run. That's not true of all games. So there's a meme that I encounter a lot in RPG spaces, a lot of the time in D&D specific spaces, complaining about being a forever GM, which is, oh, I'm stuck being the GM all the time. Oh, GMing is miserable work and I hate it. I don't enjoy playing like this. I wish it would stop. And I'm here to say right now, if I ever see another one of those, I'm gonna fucking lose it.
What?
I'm going to snap. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I hate these stupid things.
What's happening?
It's a good thing the internet's never beaten a joke into the ground, otherwise you'd be in danger of snapping and losing it.
Good thing that's never happened.
Oh, we're gonna get some strongly worded comments about this one.
Good, bring them on. I'll fight all of you in the comments.
No!
So, GMing is not a burden. It is a role that often has a lot of expectations on it, especially in games like that, but it's a player role. You're a player, you're here to have fun, and you should have fun playing that role, or you shouldn't be playing it. Like, my first recommendation in any social occasion where you're like, ugh, my friends are expecting something of me that I don't want to do, and I'm gonna whine about it, talk to them and tell them that you're not going to do it. That should be step one. If they're gonna be jerks about it, hey, guess what? If your friends are pressuring you to do something you don't want to do and you're not up for, that's not what a friend is.
Oh my god. You're not wrong in any dimension.
Whether it's drugs or GMing, it's important to set boundaries with your friends. And no is a complete sentence.
But I also think that, like, part of this is because DMing, like you just said, it's difficult and intimidating a lot of the time. So if you're the sort of forever DM and other people in the party might be interested in DMing, but they think it's kind of scary and intimidating, they might not want to try at risk of disappointing you guys. And that means the only person who DMs is the person who's, like, got the experience and the boldness to be willing to take the plunge.
Yeah, and that brings you to the next thing.
Every time you say the next thing and we don't move to the next slide, I get more worried.
Okay, so again, talk to your group. If you're drained, or even if you just want to slow things down, if you're like, I can do this, but not at the pace we're doing it, they will want to hear that, and they'll want to go along with it because presumably they enjoy playing with you. And if you are in a case like Red said, where it feels like you're the only one who's stuck being a GM, I've got a secret tip for you that will help you with trying to introduce new games, and that will give you some relief from the stress of GMing and potentially give you more time to plan the game you are running if you want to continue it later. It's a round robin. So a round robin is essentially just you all go in a circuit in the group and each of you run a one-shot of a particular system, like the specific system. And what a one-shot is depends on the needs of the specific game system. And like in Blades in the Dark, a one-shot is probably going to be one heist, which might be a couple sessions, which doesn't touch on the crew mechanics much, but is still like good. In Lancer, a one-shot is going to be one mission, so you can actually do the attrition mechanics, which is going to be like 2 to 3 fights. And essentially, one of you runs a one-shot, then the next person runs a one-shot in that same system, and then you keep going around until all of you doing that. This means all of you get a bit of experience with GMing, but hopefully not enough to wear you out. There's much lower pressure on people's expectations to do an exceptional job on their first time, which is always like not gonna happen, but it's important to actively work against that because people are gonna feel that even if it's not true. So everyone going, hey, this is gonna be my first time running this and it might be rough, helps a lot to ease the pressure of it, because it's like, well, I mean, I can also expect that they won't do perfectly, so why should I worry about being perfect for them?
Yeah.
And at the end of it, you'll have a bunch of play experience. You'll all have gotten to play a lot more than you GM, so even if it's just, hey, I'd rather play than GM, all of you get that a lot. You get a lot of experience with the system, and you have a lot of character ideas that you played with that you might go, hey, I kind of want to expand on this for like a full game. And obviously, you might not do that, and then the end result of that is you had a fun time with your friends where you all got to run some and you expanded your horizons. It's a good experience, and it's a great onboarding thing, and it's also just useful for getting players to open up to the prospect aspect of GMing more. It's real neat.
Nice.
It also is good to have your players have more experience with different GM styles that are not just Matt Mercer and Brennan Lee Mulligan, because they're great. But if that's the only thing a player has experience with, they're gonna have incompatible expectations.
Yeah, if
It's
you're-
also just, you can't become a good GM by emulating somebody else's GMing style, even though this is another case of like, if all you know is D&D, you're gonna assume that's how all TTRPGs must work. If all you know is one specific gaming style, that's gonna be how you think all TTRPGs have to be run.
And another thing I want to highlight, alongside being GMs, Brennan and Matt are showmen. They are putting on a show, and that is an important factor in how they GM and what they prioritize there. And you are not putting on a show. You do not have the energy or resources to put on a show.
Unless you
should
are,
not.
you know, like if you're on like a live play or something.
Oh,
like, that is,
well, yeah,
I'm just
but
saying that.
okay,
at that
yes.
point, you are putting on a show. But the
yes.
thing is, Matt and Brennan are respectively an actor and an improv actor.
Yeah.
So like they have a very specific tailored skill set to making a huge production of
Yes.
running a game.
Yeah, they've got a lot of skill at putting on a show.
You don't have to do the voices if you don't want to.
Oh god, I cannot do any voices. I can barely do my own voice.
How long before we see the Ganondorf voice in an episode of Critical Role?
And we've
Now that the
already
cat's out
heard
the bag.
Ganondorf.
Anyway, if all that doesn't work, you can also just play a game that doesn't have a GM role, so here are a bunch of those.
Whoa! The greatest twist of the century.
Yeah, I just went on a soapbox about how you can do sensible approaches, but then no, screw that.
Feels like it's going to be another overlapping with board games zone.
Actually, surprisingly not.
Really?
Yeah. So this is called Wanderhome. This is another game that kind of got quite popular. It's very useful for new role players too, because it does a good job of guiding people through the basics of roleplay. Also, it's got cute animal people. I know that's a thing for a lot of people. I've never understood cute. Cleo, if you're listening right now, I'm sorry. I don't get you.
Yeah, she's in a
okay.
separate room, don't worry.
Okay,
for
good
me.
for her. But yeah, I figure that will appeal to a lot of people. So essentially, the way this works is the book is kind of like a guide to just group freeform roleplay in terms of here are tips for how you should act when you are embodying a certain character or place or thing. And here's some basic ways to keep the story moving forward if it feels like people are getting to that, well, we're all being quiet now, what do we do? Essentially, everything in the game that becomes important, like a non-player character or the terrain, the area of a place is given a voice and presented as important, which is the cool little thing for selling the pastoral vibe. And they all have natures like grieving, and like this tower has, oh, there's a grieving soul in there, and that means they can always do the things listed there, so there's like a little jumping between back and forth of little sections of vibes that tell you things about how they interact with the world, and then when you're voicing them and saying that then they'll do this, that's how you play them. Despite all that, there is actually an engine to this. It's a pretty light engine. It's called No Dice, No Masters, or Belonging Outside Belonging.
Oh my god.
What?
No, it's fine.
What's the problem?
This is such a fun. This is not a community I basically ever hang out with. I love that there is no consistency within the naming conventions. I love that it seems to just be like either the first thing you think of, No Dice, No Masters, or like a completely random word association that sounds cool, powered by the apocalypse.
You gotta understand how much indie game designers are just absolute gremlins with opinions.
I know you, so
You know what? Fair enough.
I'm assuming that you're representative of your chosen community.
Not a representative sample size, yet a representative sample.
So the Belonging Outside Belonging system is a very simple token economy where you get a token when like something bad, when you do something bad or something bad or sad happens to you, and you spend it to be able to do something nice and hopeful.
Ooh.
It's very simple and pretty thematic to get you in the mind of, I want like the kind of sad things to happen so that I can get tokens, which is pushing things forward towards the vibe, and I want to be able to do hopeful things.
I like that this game has the philosophical stance that karma is a zero-sum game.
I feel like you could put this token system into any game.
Oh yeah, it's super simple. I am in love with the No Dice, No Masters system.
I just feel like I've seen DMs, again, essentially homebrew something to approximate this. Not in so many words, but like most games will give you some sort of, honestly, most GMs will just find a way to reward players for interesting RP choices. I think in Shadowrun, is it like, is it karma? Yeah,
which
you can burn karma to succeed on things. Or like you'll get inspiration in D&D as a little GM DM, like, oh, you made me laugh, that one was funny, take inspiration or something. And I think those are always fun. This just feels like such a clean and elegant way to do it. Like, if you do something that, like, is a bad or sad thing that happens to you, or it inconveniences you, you get an actual tangible reward you can spend, so that next time you want to do something good, you can basically push, like, it's gonna happen.
Yeah, and I want to highlight the bad and sad things happening to you are things that you as a player want to happen, because they add to the story and to the melancholic chill air as you're wandering around.
Yeah, one of the things about, like, oh, I see a beautiful, tiny, like, moment and I describe it to the table, or I marvel at something incredible.
Exactly.
It's literally rewarding you for roleplay.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's a very simple, very elegant roleplay engine. I will confess, I am of the gamer brain type where when I sit and write something down, it just gets more and more complex.
Yes.
And like, you know, there's a reason I was so hyped to talk about all the Panic at the Dojo combos earlier. That's where my gamer brain is. I really admire things like this.
Elegant in their simplicity.
Exactly.
As someone who I think has gone on record saying that I just can't stand like D&D combat, just categorically. It's so slow, it's so boring, nothing ever fucking happens. I love this system because it is just the pure essence of role-playing, where it's like, in order to get a token, to get a mechanical benefit, you have to use your own monkey brain to describe a moment of beauty. That is fantastic. I love that is how you get action resources in this game, as opposed to wading through a spreadsheet on D&D Beyond to make sure you have the right number of spell points to do some bullshit 5th level something or other that's not even gonna land because the other guy rolls too high on something or other.
Yeah, I do think that one of the greatest weaknesses of D&D as a system does seem to be the categorical failure, nothing happens thing that is so common in it.
Yeah.
Because it's like, you rolled a hit, you missed, nothing happens. You cast your spell, you burned a valuable resource to do it, nothing happens. And it's just like, well, what's the fucking point? Why am I even here? Because if it happens too often, it becomes just greatly frustrating. And with D&D, it happens like once a round, minimum.
One feature I really like about Panic at the Dojo's roll system is there is no nothing happens. Even if you roll low, you use that on moves that have low roll thresholds to get those powers effect.
Yeah, there is
Exactly.
no lose a turn.
Yep, and surprising return, we've got playbooks again, but in this case, playbooks are pretty much more just like story prompts.
I think I have the font this was written in.
It's amazing.
I think it's Luminari. It's one of my favorites.
That sounds familiar. It might
Yeah,
be.
this is Luminari.
Yeah. Essentially, this adds the third level to the token spending. There's spend a token, gain a token, and you can always do X, which is don't spend or gain a token to do things. And like, you know, the poet, you can always self-deprecate. That's a very punchy series of actively mechanical lines, except for the last output bit where it's a narrative meeting, and it's like, wow, that's neat. That's some elegant game design.
I love the little entry there. You can always ask what used to be here. Just that one line tells you so much about what kind of game and world this is.
Absolutely.
Oh my god, it shorthands to Bob. God, you guys are incorrigible.
What do you mean?
Nothing, it's fine.
What's wrong with Bob?
Nothing, it's fine. It's better than Pibta.
Or Fit D.
So,
Like, Fit D's, no, we're not gonna. Sorry.
Come on.
I had
I'm
that
closing
joke
the
and
spreadsheet. The
I
slideshow.
holstered it because I wasn't going to subject the kind people of this call to that humor. Red, I'm disappointed in you.
You don't understand how little sleep I've been getting since Tears of the Kingdom came out.
So, in kind of a pivot, kind of not thematically, this is Bleak Spirit, which is a similar type of GM-less game trying to be like Dark Souls.
Oh god.
But specifically, not the mechanical setup of Dark Souls, the narrative setup of Dark
Oh,
Souls.
the good bit.
Yeah, the good bit.
The accessible, interesting part that's designed to actually make sense when you look at it. Or at least sort of.
No, the part of the cool mechanics of this are how it kind of doesn't.
Oh well, that's
Yeah,
fine.
it's
I like a
because-
big mystery.
Yeah,
so.
because the way that Dark Souls does narrative is you'll find random bits and bobs in like item descriptions and area setups, and you'll go to an area and there's some new weird horrors with like cool ambiance, and then there's this one adventuring murderer who goes in around cutting through everything, helping random people with side quests that are gonna like ruin their their lives and the world while the adventurer is like completely silent and then dies a bunch. And that is what this game is emulating, which is very cool because that is not what I hear people pitch when they say I want a game like Dark Souls, because usually they mean the mechanics, but I really like that narrative bit.
You know what? I'm gonna give you a break from getting roasted in the comments by giving my own extremely spicy take.
Oh boy, good luck.
I think that a lot of people want a game like Dark Souls because that means they don't need to do any work to balance the combat or make the game intuitive to play or make sense. I think they know they can just put a bunch of super strong monsters anywhere they want, and Turbo Chad gamer dudes who tie their machismo to how many times they've died in a video game will bash their head against that brick wall until it breaks, and then they get to call it a win. And I don't think it's because they think, boy, I really love the lore of this game that's impossible to find or suss out except by reading the wiki. I think they're like, finally, a game that I don't need to make playable by human beings. Just seems like it would be a lot easier and less time consuming than something like, for instance, Tears of the Kingdom, which is masterfully designed and very intuitive.
Okay, we're cutting you off.
Well, here's the thing, and I'm gonna make this quick so we don't go off on a Dark Souls tangent. But I'm sure there's some application to tabletop design as well.
It's probably relevant. It's
having
fine.
played a handful of other Souls-like games that were not designed by the From Software team, a lot of them really don't get it, and many do. Many do understand the nuance in balancing difficulty where it is hard but fair as opposed to hard but fuck you. And some games are just ungracefully hard but fuck you. Mm-hmm. And sure, people can bash their heads against the wall and eventually win and be like, wow, I did it. But there is a reason only a handful of those games, even like within the From Software catalog, it's like Dark Souls, Sekiro, Bloodborne, and Elden Ring. Like Dark Souls 2 and 3, from everything that I've heard. Like those are the ones where the combat has depth and nuance and complexity and pain, sure, but it does actually have to be designed well, even though it's hard for you to actually be able to like suss out how do these enemies work, how do I solve these problems, rather than just, oh, these enemies have way too much health and I get one shot immediately. Fuck me, I guess.
Yeah.
So I think you are onto something, but I'll come to bat for the games that actually do it right compared to the games that take the surface aesthetics but don't entirely know how to translate that into good game design.
That's fair.
My experience with Souls-like games has been mostly restricted to a lot of the indie 2D Metroidvania ones, because I like Metroidvanias and I'll go like, yeah, I can put up with some Dark Souls for some Metroid.
Right.
But I have also played a fair bit of Bloodborne. Obviously, I'm trans, you could have cold-rated that one. But
Is this a prerequisite I wasn't aware of?
oh yeah.
Okay, cool. No wonder I didn't like that game very much.
Yeah, and like the thing is, all of those, Bloodborne included, I will really like the aesthetic, I'll really like the world design and the exploration and power gain, but I'll hit far enough where I get into one boss fight that I bash my head against it for a couple days, and then I go, you know what, actually, I want to be happy in this life because I don't know if I'll get another one, and then I just stop playing the game.
I've literally seen you stop playing Bloodborne for self-care purposes 3 times.
Yeah, literally.
The world is so clean and beautiful and nobody's trying to murder me.
Yeah, and like, you know, I want to shout out some cool ones like Grime is a really cool indie platformer Metroidvania Souls-like you can get on Steam. So
None
is
of those
Ender
words are in the
Lilies.
Bible.
There's like some really cool ones, and I played them and I was like, wow, I love this. I'm going to stop playing forever. And
Oh my god.
anyway, I guess I'm sprinkling random video game recommendations in this too, so have fun.
Yay, editing, this is gonna be such a breeze. So, Bleak Spirit.
Yeah, Bleak Spirit.
Like Dark Souls, but gotten good. Oh!
Hey!
Oh my god.
So, the way this works is there are 3 roles that you play. You can be the Wanderer, which is the PC, silently wandering around murdering things. You can be the World, which is you're controlling the area and saying like, oh, and then this bad thing happens to you. Get fucked. Wow, there was a giant behind this corner, idiot.
That's appropriate.
And then there's the Chorus, which does not start with W, so terrible game, completely ruined it all. Basically, they're there to chime in and add supplemental details to random things and be like, oh, here's a detailed description of what kind of column is in this ruined Colosseum, so you can tell that it's actually Corinthian because it's got like the flower bushel around it.
Nice. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
And there's
Yes,
like...
I also understand columns.
Yeah, and there are some very important things about how you talk about and discuss the inner workings of the world and the Wanderer, and that you fucking don't. Shut up. You don't get to know anything. You don't get to know what the Wanderer is thinking. You don't get to discuss anything about the world, and it's very gloomy and cryptic, and you're just wandering around being like, okay, well, they've got Corinthian columns, but I don't know, it's just like a ruined Colosseum, and there's like nightmare giants with bugs for eyes. I don't get it.
Yeah.
There's a whole established structure with different parts that codify specific scenes that you have to go through. Like, you can get like, hey, let's look at this cool environmental feature and admire the view, or, oh no, there's a fight with a monster, we got shoved down a hole and broke our leg, and now we have to use like a demon bone instead of our normal human bone leg, and now we've got evil demon powers or something.
Are you trying to sneak Yu-Gi-Oh! GX references into this shit?
Oh, right, that I haven't gotten that far in GX yet. I'm watching the GX sub for personal reasons, and also...
What the...
Well, I did.
Ow.
Are you
It's
okay?
research purposes. Shut up, Mom.
Oh yeah, there's like a guy who's like, yeah, I replaced my bone with a dinosaur bone because I broke it, and when you break a bone, you famously remove it and replace it with a bone that is not for the same animal you are.
I don't know what's worse, the fact that that wasn't an intentional reference, or the fact that I understood the reference.
Yeah, I think this reflects poorly on both of us.
Oh, God.
I alone am pure.
And this is kind of similar to Wanderhome and a shtick you'll notice in the rest of these things, that the approach to GM-less games is a lot more like guiding for how the storytelling is going to work. Essentially, it's like, here's all the roles that the group takes in storytelling, and here's how you should do that, with a lot of tips to do that well. That's generally the ethos of GM-less games like this.
It's like a group improv session.
Essentially, yeah,
love it.
but with a few more
I
rules.
love this.
Yeah.
This is my favorite part of this game.
Leaping to conclusions?
So, the way this works is after every scene, after you've all done like the cryptic performance, each of you goes on your own to write down what you think the plot of this game is.
Oh my God, it's a game with homework?
And here's the thing, like it said, you don't talk to anyone else about what anyone is thinking or feeling. You don't tell anyone what any of your conclusions are. What you do is you take your conclusions and make them inform the things you add to the world later on.
This is genius.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, I've talked about how it's so difficult for writers to create truly mysterious environments because the writer wants to know the answer to the question. And the thing is, it's good writing praxis to know why the things that exist in your world are there, because that way you write a mystery, but the mystery has a solution. If you write a mystery without knowing the answer to it, J.J. Abrams, that's a bad mystery because it's unsolvable. You're just gonna make up an answer later, and there's no way you can plant enough evidence or clues to let anybody figure that out, or for it to be a satisfying resolution to the mystery. So when you're a writer and you're making a mysterious world, you want there to be an internal logic. I cannot think of a better way to do that while also guaranteeing the world feels mysterious and strange than by having a committee of people who are all doing that, but none of them are talking to each other. But then they tell the story together.
And then, of course, it's everyone will add things based on their own conclusions, and then everyone else goes, ah, crap, I have to rework everything to see how this fits in, and everyone's doing that, and you get a whole mess. It's great.
This is genius because, like, the joke of, like, oh, designed by committees, that you get the most bland cookie-cutter stuff because it's the lowest common denominator. But designed by committee, where the committee can't talk to each other, is absolutely, like, galaxy brain, because then everybody has to work with the same materials, but they will take it in completely different directions based on their own ideas or inclinations.
And
this is spectacular.
And it works for this very specific tone of genre, which is melancholic, post-apocalyptic, the world is in ruins, there was something great here, and now it's like, the question is like, what was the area at its height? How did it fall from that to this? Which means this is a setting that used to be great and is no longer. So it makes sense that you can have your own personal headcanon of, I think, like, at its height, this was a great flying civilization. Let's just fucking steal Castle in the Sky. It was a great flying civilization. It ran out of the material that let
this is on your mind.
I don't know! Shush! It ran out of the material that it used to make it fly, so most of it fell out of the sky. So then when you're doing the story, it's like there's gonna be a lot of shattered ruins at odd angles. A lot of things that haven't worked or moved in a very long time, possibly some floating stones still up above. And everyone else has to fucking work around that, because some of them might be like, oh, I think mine was like it was an ancient kingdom that summoned some kind of elder god that wrecked the place, and now they have to deal with the fact that half of it's floating. They're like, maybe the Elder God put it up there? I don't
Yeah,
know.
well, I mean, my first thought, hearing that and not, like, knowing what your thought would be like, oh, at odd angles and things in midair, of course, the dimensions are being twisted, space is falling apart, and, like, that's exactly the thing, because then you start adding more and more nonsense and it all falls apart, and it's great.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm very impressed.
Look, I think all of these games have very interesting hooks to them that appeal to different players for different reasons. I really liked that Animals game. Like, I want to play this game, like, today.
I can like feel it tickling my writer brain.
Hell yeah. See, that's the thing. That's part of why I'm covering, like, a bunch of different kinds of games that I think are neat, because I think, like, people are gonna go, oh, this is a fundamentally different approach. I think that's a cool approach.
Yeah.
And obviously, to be clear, this is kind of limited because all of these are approaches that I do like. I've not talked about many games that do things that I don't like because I can't really talk up what they do well because I don't see what they do well. I just go, well, I don't get it.
That's okay.
So
This is a hell of a spread.
I highly recommend to everyone watching, treat this as like a start. Look at like the games I'm highlighting. Look at the games you can find tangential to them, and like try talking to people who are in those spaces and see if they've got games they recommend. Because I assure you, they'll have plenty of like really big names that I didn't touch on.
Open the floodgates, why don't you?
Yeah, genuinely.
Have you heard about Fish Knife?
Fish Blade, actually.
Oh, I'm sorry, Fish Blade?
Yes.
My mistake. Have you heard about Fish Blade? This is
Most of the ones from that jam were joke games, which is fine. Joke games are
Fish
cool.
Blade is real?
Oh yeah, they did a Fish Blade game.
God damn it!
Yeah.
Please,
well,
I only play Salmon Cannon.
shout out to my favorite joke RPG, Pokathulu.
Oh my god.
We're not talking about that right now, but if you can, whatever, Google
That's
it.
the
Whatever.
most mid-2000s lol random.
Yeah, and it's actually a good game,
You
which
know
is the
what's
most disappointing
funny?
thing.
Putting Cthulhu in everything. You know
Yeah.
what's fun? What if Pokemon was serious?
Yeah, I mean, it's not serious. It manages to dodge that bit, so it's
What
not
if
actually edgy.
Pokemon was
But
a
anyway,
horror?
one thing I want to note, having brought up, like, hey, there's the belonging outside belonging and Forged in the Dark and Powered by the Apocalypse and whatnot, this game is also a game built on the framework of another called Lovecraft-esque, which I think you can guess what the shtick with that one is.
Racism.
Yeah!
Hey!
Yay! But, that's also a thing where you can look at and be like, oh, a Lovecraft story also follows the premise of the main character going alone through things and then getting progressively more and more messed up until they get slugified at the end or whatever. And it also has, like, you want to make things more confusing by have people not jump to conclusions, but not coordinate, so you get something way messier. It's cool. This is a really cool game.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really cool games out there, and this is one of them. And here's another one.
Ooh, oh. Wait a minute. Is this the one? Yes!
Yeah, as featured on Dimension 20 that one time. Stapled onto D&D 5e, which I think was a poor choice for a few reasons, because those have fundamentally different assumptions on the relationship between the players, and meshing those kind of made the story a bit tangled. It was still a fun season. I did really enjoy it.
Such a fun season, and I love the letter writing stuff.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's a part of this game. There's a specific epistolary phase where they mandate that players write letters to each other. It rules.
And how busted Gift of Gab is in a setting where social interaction is everything.
Yeah,
and you can
that
take
is
back the last thing you said if it doesn't play right.
Yeah, that is another part of why I think this is not a great idea to mash it up with D&D specifically. I'd recommend trying playing it straight. Essentially, the way this works is there's a bit more like codified jockeying for position than in the others, which makes sense because it's more a game where the players are going to be actively at odds with each other. So you've got your reputation as like a specific resource that you need to work around and like worry about your actions based on how they'll affect your reputation. I'll be honest, I'm a sucker for any time a game is like, whenever you act in service of duty or morality, X thing happens. I'm like, hell yeah, I love to repress my emotions for the sake of duty.
Oh, for crying out loud.
What?
It's just like that tokens for bad things happening to you thing
Yeah,
again.
pretty much. It is pretty similar, except instead of a token, it's controlling your reputation, and you can use your reputation to bully people with reputations lower than you, so it can be a tool of control, but also it's fundamentally controlling you, and it's like,
Of course, yeah.
good old Regency nonsense. And then you have literal token economy for, I want to push the narrative in X direction, and I want X bad thing to happen to someone else or X good thing to happen to me.
Of course.
It's not much of a mechanic, but I just think it's neat. Monologue tokens, you spend one and point at another player and make them monologue their character's inner thoughts right now. You don't like get that knowledge in character. It's not like any rethoughts, anything, but it's literally just like, hey, let's get an inner monologue, and I love that.
That's beautiful. I love that this game really relies on the players approaching it in good faith.
Absolutely.
And not metagaming. The joy of Austinian romance is the dramatic irony.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think the thing to know with that is that presumably the players are coming here because they want that kind of story. If they're metagaming, they won't be metagaming for, I want my character to win. They'll be like, I want my character to suffer.
Yeah, exactly.
And using the monologue to know the dramatic irony to better, like, mess things up is beautiful.
God, that's buck wild. This is so fun. This is really like, I took my Blorbo and I put him in the dishwasher to see what would happen. Kind of storytelling.
And as mentioned, the epistolary phase.
Oh, yes.
As mentioned, after encountering this game, I now make my own epistolary phase just as like a little writing thing in every game I play. I'm a complete nuisance.
God. What is it with you and games that give you homework?
What do you mean? What, you're telling me you don't want to write angsty letters all the time?
That's not at all what I'm saying. I just think it's very funny that this is your gimmick now.
And obviously, another important thing is that it's not just the players like messing with each other. There are important NPCs that are connected to all the things. You can play this with a GM role, but if you don't play it with that, the other players control your connections.
My God.
But specifically, they control their connections with the goal of messing with you, but not bolstering their own character. They can spend the resolve tokens from their character to make the connection they control mess with that character more, like have it be significantly bad. So it's like a whole big bundle mess of social entanglements and just falling apart relationships.
This is a game changer. That's buck wild.
Yeah, and there's
incredibly irresponsible too.
Yeah, and there's like, you deal out like specific relationship cards at the start of the thing that connect PCs, and they've got like an open side and a hidden side, so it's like, oh, they're old friends. They're secret lovers, actually. Have fun with that. Or like, oh, they're old friends. Actually, they hate each other and are jockeying with each other for the inheritance or something, and it's
God.
Well, they both look the same to everyone else. This game is great. It rules.
So I guess if you like soap operas, this is the move.
Oh, speaking of if you like soap operas.
Oh my God.
You're in my world now.
No! Is this just gay finishing school, the RPG?
It sure is.
Okay. What is finishing school?
It's like a boarding school that's like getting you prepared for getting married, I think.
What?
Yeah, I don't know. It's like
marriage has homework too.
It's like a 1950s thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, how'd you like to be in like the 1950s of Western Europe or the US and queer semi-repressed ladies in a boarding school and have relationship troubles?
I would love to go to school for equestrian sports and fencing though.
Of course you would. You know what? I think you'd fit right in.
Because here's the thing, if you do equestrian training and sword fighting, you're just getting all the skills to become a knight.
Exactly, yeah.
I don't think you can use fencing on a horse well.
Well, that's a fault of the game mechanics.
If horses could back up better, they would be perfect for fencing.
Oh man, a centaur fencer. That'd be so cool.
Oh, that would be cool.
No, Red, you just hold ZL and then it's fine. You can back up in any direction you want.
You know, I suppose the problem is, because the fencing stance basically involves you sort of crab walking. It'd be a little bit awkward for a centaur.
Yeah, it's hard for a centaur to walk sideways.
The legs don't articulate that way.
So, the way this works, as it said in the header of the splash page, this is a Firebrands game. It's also based on another game. You're noticing that's a trend. So, the way a Firebrands game works is that essentially it's a bunch of mini games. And they're mini games of social interaction that go back and forth on things, and you just play the mini game when triggered, and then when you're done, you go, okay, let's follow things and let's play another mini game based on next interaction that happens. For instance, here's Gossip Chain, which is if you want to introduce a bunch of rumors to things to cause problems and misconceptions and etc., you go around, you pick the rumors off of this, and you spread rumors to mess with people's social standing. And
my God,
yeah.
Chaos.
Yeah, essentially that's it. It's again more codified than things like Wanderhome in terms of how you play it to account for the increased chaos of the players all messing with each other. One thing I really liked is there's a mini game for having a conversation with someone over a meal, and a different mini game for having a conversation with someone where you're trying to communicate something scandalous to them surreptitiously. So like if you're, you know, having thoughts TM and you have to deal with all that, you would play that one, and there's like whole markers for like how much have you slipped up and said something scandalous that others would overhear, and if it gets too much, then the mini game ends happens and you end up in trouble, and it's like, oh man.
This feels incredibly stressful. I feel like this is definitely the kind of thing where you need the right table.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
This even more so than Good Society, but both it and Good Society, you really need a table that's specifically here for and on board for this. And really, I want to emphasize, that is true of literally every game. If you don't have a table that is both up for complex, heady tactics and interested in a story where fighting is the primary focus and way to resolve things, none of the games in that first section work. If you can't handle the conversation improving, and you can't handle the specific, these are the mechanized tropes, and I have to follow how the tropes work, and I can't make a story that doesn't flow like that, all the Powered by the Apocalypse and derivative games probably aren't going to work for you. Also, one last thing I want to highlight for that, sometimes some people in your group are going to be down for that and other people's in your group aren't, and it's very important to recognize that you can branch out your group to only include like the people who would be interested in that and some other folks who also are, and that isn't breaking up your friend group. It's very important to not have, this is X group that plays these games and they play the games together, and if we're not including everyone with them, we are harming the social group. You really want to get like an expanding web of more RPG players that you can contact and hang out with, and then you can connect to people based on your shared interests and what kind of games you do, and then you play that, and then it's neat. So you may have noticed a pattern, by which I mean I've repeatedly said, hey, there's a pattern here, look at it. I'm very subtle and smart in how I'm presenting things.
Compatible with Fist is how I describe the faces of my enemies.
So essentially, there are a lot of engines that people go, I want to make a game that runs on this because it's popular or cool, or let's do like a big jam about them. Then people use them for games. And that is neat, and that is a big part of how the system works. Here are a bunch of relatively prevalent examples that I've seen a few ones of. As you might note at the bottom, not a page of recommendations. I am not recommending these.
Wait,
some of these,
are you also not? Are you
some
not
of these
recommending them, or are you just not?
I really like and I think are cool. Some of these I hate with a burning passion.
Ooh.
I'm not telling you which ones. So here's the thing.
Enjoy the minefield.
Yeah, no, hear me out. I mean, they're gonna be enjoying the minefield either way, but I want to be clear that the reason I really dislike most of these is because of my personal design sensibilities, not because I think they're inherently bad. So I want you to look at them based on your design sensibilities, because here's the trick. If you see one and you go, wow, I really like this, there are a lot of other games like those that you can then look up and go, hey, look at all these ones running on this engine, let's see if they do interesting things with it. And if you encounter one and you go, oh, I really don't like this, you can see the stamp on another game and go, got it, this is running on an engine I really don't like, I'll just avoid this game and save myself time. Which is what I do with the ones I don't like, but I don't want my taste to become your tastes, and that's already a limit of the slideshow highlighting a bunch of games that are to my tastes. So I want this to be like an example of, hey, if you scroll through itch, you're probably going to encounter a lot of these. This is how that works, and this is how I recommend navigating it.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, understanding games in terms of the systems they're built on is really clever, because it's kind of like the subgenres of like video games where, you know, this is a first-person shooter, this is a platformer, this is a puzzle game, this is some other weird, you know, dating sim, whatever, who knows. And understanding what kind of games you like and being able to kind of put either like genres or system names to them is, I see now, the same kind of thing you can do with tabletop stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. I will also warn you there. One of the problems with that is that tabletop gamers have a lot of thoughts on how to codify and name things, and they also get into fights with each other so often. So you will find a miserable cesspool of discourse if you look into that. It's also a really cool, like, part of thought that I think is useful for RPG analysis. I just wanted to warn you, you're gonna see some shit.
Honey, we read YouTube comments.
Oh, God. Okay,
no, our community's wonderful.
Yeah, we love them. You hear that? We love you
I've
guys.
seen other people's YouTube comments.
Yeah, that's honestly the more accurate.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to emphasize is that, hey, if there are a bunch of systems that are running about that are like, hey, let's make some cool hacks of them, I basically wanted to highlight a couple miscellaneous systems that I think have really cool resolution systems that I want people to hack more of. So consider this an open call to look at those, go, ooh, that's neat, and then write your own nonsense.
Ah, there it is.
This is Don't Rest Your Head, which is a horror RPG, which I don't like horror all that much, but I do like this game. Basically, the premise is it's like urban fantasy horror horror where you've kind of got like cool powers by being like an awakened, but what that means is you can't go to sleep or the nightmares get you, which are like horrible nightmare monsters. So you're a group of like perpetual insomniacs, and you know, that can't last too long. It's really bad for you.
Yeah, that kills you pretty fast.
Yeah, it's a rough situation. The way this mechanically works is you've got a skill check system for things that roll on a dice pool of d6s, and the amount of exhaustion you have gives you more dice for that pool. So the more tired you are, the more powerful you are. But the way the pools work is low rolls, 1s, 2s, or 3s, are successes. The single highest roll determines which category is in control of that roll, and if your tiredness is in control, you get another tiredness die permanently, which gives you more power but makes it more likely for the exhaustion to roll over and keep going until you crash and fall asleep, and that's the worst thing to happen, and then the nightmares come.
Do you just instantly die?
No, but your friends have to protect you for a scene, by which I mean grab you and run fleeing until they can wake you up.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, it's very stressful.
So you can sleep eventually.
It's just not great.
Okay,
Yeah.
Sounds manageable.
I mean, managing it is like mechanically presented. It's how you manage the exhaustion, and you can voluntarily take exhaustion before rolling to like push yourself to get more power, but you know,
Yeah.
exhaustion's hard to get rid of. And then there's also things like there's madness dice, which because they're more dice are more power, but if they win, they'll hit you in your stress boxes and whatnot. And then the GM rolls pain dice against it, and like if that wins, you get messed up, and also you might just fail the thing. It's a cool little rolling system, and it sells the cascading both gain of power and gain of looming, oh, this is really bad, that I think is neat for, in this case, for the kind of horror where your power is bad for you, but I think there's other uses for it too, and I think there's other ways to modify it. And hey, I love neat dice tricks. I was popping off about Panic at the Dojo and Dicey Dungeons. I love messing with dice pools.
Heck yeah.
And for the other thing I want to shout out as a cool engine that I want people to use more of, this is, it literally calls itself an engine because there isn't actually a game to this. It gives you like the tools to turn it into a game, basically like, hey, here's how to run this and here's what kind of other things to add to make it a bit more robust. But it's essentially, here's a basic engine for how to resolve things and how to make things flow, and it's really neat. Essentially, there's this chart of bad things and good things that can be consequences of your skill check. You're gonna succeed at the thing unless that's on the stake sheet, but also like you might get hurt or you might lose something important or whatever else the GM puts down on it. And then you roll your dice pool and you'll get like positives or negatives, and depending on if you're going boldly or cautiously, you'll have to re-roll all the positives or all the negatives, so you're much less likely to get those again. You use the positives to get additional augments to make the roll better, and use the negatives to cancel out dangers. So it's just a very simple, which side of the stakes do you prioritize, and then there's still the odds, and that makes it way less likely that you might get, like, if you're being cautiously, you're gonna get way fewer of the augments, but you might, and etc, etc.
So this is like, this isn't a game, but it's comparable to something like the D20 system.
Yes.
In that it's an alternate, it's a different kind of system you could build a game around by skinning it with a world or setting.
Absolutely.
That makes sense.
And one thing I wanted to note about that comment is that it's not just that it can be a system, it can be the system for a mode, and then you can staple different modes together. Like, the original thing was, hey, here's the combat games at the very beginning. You can take a combat game, and then, like, Panic at the Dojo doesn't have any narrative resolution much at all, but you can do that with Schema, and then suddenly you've got, like, here's some wide-scaling narrative consequences, or let's have a cool anime beatdown, let's go.
Yeah.
And essentially, stapling is a matter of finding out which are the distinct modes of play that operate differently, and then can you bifurcate them into, like, they fundamentally operate differently, not just narratively, but mechanically, and then you can stick a bunch of different games together. I know of someone who's doing, like, a big nightmare conglomeration space-like adventure politics game a la Proper Gundam that uses Lancer for mech combat, Legacy for the politics adapted to space instead of post-apocalypse,
Right.
Battle Group, which is a Lancer adjacent game for, like, fleet combat, and I think there was, like, another thing they were mentioning. I remember a fourth system, but, like, you can staple a whole bunch of nonsense together if you're gonna be doing a whole bunch of different things in their own lanes. And yeah, it sounds like a massive undertaking, and I'm like, I fully admire your ambition.
You're gonna need more dice, my friend.
Basically, you can get as ambitious as you want, and you can pair a lot of things together as you want, but understanding the fundamental expectations of a game and what it wants from you is is important. Understanding the fundamental expectations of your group, and if those align with the game, or if they don't, how to adapt things to make them align. Basically, understand the tools you're using and the purpose you're using them for, and nothing will be beyond your means.
Hell yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh my god.
Hey, I was a surprise lightning round, idiots. You thought I was done?
No, I saw there was a 7-year slide.
Yeah, so these ones I haven't done full like write-ups on because they're less familiar to me, or other such less inherently, oh yeah, this rules. But I think they're neat and worth checking out for their own cool reasons and cool things. Band of Blades is another Forge in the Dark one. Pretty depressing. It's about an army retreating from like a failed fight against an undead horde in like a fantasy setting. Pretty gloomy. It's still got a GM role, but it does some very interesting self-delineation of narrative power and establishing specific things about the army in the context of the world to the players. Emberwind is another fight game like the first few, unique in that it has a very robust enemy AI feature so that you can do it completely GM-less, which if you were worried about like that bit in the beginning where I was like, hey, so the GMing fight games is a lot of work, because it is, and it's like cool work, but it's work. Emberwind is maybe an interesting thing to consider. Flying Circus is an interesting example of stapling because it takes the Powered by the Apocalypse format and then makes like a really detailed playing game combat simulator on top of it, with like altitude tracking as a resource and guns and like a whole lot of nonsense. If you're really into World War I era planes and whatnot, definitely worth checking out. If you're the type of person who's susceptible to becoming into that, that game might do that to you. I could feel it trying to do that to me, but I'm not the kind of person to be interested in that. But if that seems like a cool thing, the creators definitely are plain people.
Perfect.
Monster Hearts and Thirsty Sword Lesbians
I've
are...
heard of these, actually.
Yeah. They're both very cool Powered by the Apocalypse games, very good at emulating relationship drama, which should qualify them a lot for this video, but they both achieve the too horny for my tastes problem. Like, they're really neat games. When I'm in the right mood, I will absolutely love making a complete disaster in either one. But, you know, I am, as they say, repulsed.
Right room for that, kiddo.
Yeah, I mean, you're not gonna find dissenting voices here.
Yeah. Rune is a solo game that is trying to emulate Dark Souls kind of more mechanically, but not really. It's more doing its own mechanical thing. It's got like a 4x4 combat grid where you're doing a solo thing and enemy effects are telegraphed and you gotta like juggle day-night things and explore an area. It's really neat. I also want to emphasize it as kind of an outlier for what you'll find most solo games to be. Most are like solo journaling games where you'll get like a story prompt or a progression of here's how things go and you've got to like journal about it or other such things, which are really neat, and I think solo journaling games are cool. Rune has a lot more mechanics to it and is an interesting exception to that. Ironsworn can also be run solo, but it can also be done as a group with or without a GM. Similar thesis to the Powered by the Apocalypse types with the old, hey, play this like a conversation, and then when you get to points that trigger mechanical things, do that. But in this case, the mechanics are specifically, you've got like active trackers for when you make a vow to someone to do a thing, to do like a quest or help them out or not betray a thing, that becomes like a specific tracker of progress towards it, and it binds you hard, and that like shapes how the story goes, and it's like, that's neat. And then Glitch by Jenna Moran, which is, honestly, it's got a fair few neat mechanics in terms of the narrative progression of like, you get onto story arcs as like literal mechanical things, and then when you fulfill certain triggers for like, hey, you finally clean out the box of books in the back of the room that you're slowly moving into, you progress that arc and then get experience, and that's important for things. And then sometimes the arc ends like, when this ends, the house burns down, so
oh my god.
whoops. But honestly, I think the coolest thing about it is the world and all the esoteric metaphysics of that. A bit hard to wrap your head around. It's some nonsense about being an Excrucian, which is like a person that is a not person that fell out of reality and is now perpetually dying or something. And there's like a whole army of them that is trying to destroy the world, but you're the few of them who realize that destroying the world is not in fact making you less miserable, so you quit to try to just cope, and you're having a kind of rough life, but you're managing. I recommend reading in tandem with Nobilis, which is in the same world, but starring different kinds of people who all are also magically messed up, so you can get a better head on what's actually going on there. But really, it's just neat. I can throw more names out, but...
How about we don't do that?
Here's something that I
Jesus.
can contribute to the discussion, and Red will be familiar with this because we played some D&D with a few of our friends, just a little, casual campaign, went for like 7 or 8 sessions, and we're like, okay, I think we're about satisfied with our time here. And then I thought, you know what, I might want to run a campaign, might do like a little historical fantasy something or other. And I realized I don't like running 5e, I don't like the combat, playing it or running it. It's so slow. I don't like feeling like people are just missing turns when they roll poorly, so I designed a system that was basically the bare bones of 5e, where it's like there are 4 key attributes, you have like one special thing you can do. So the goal is that it's mostly RP, and then when it does get to combat, it's very simple, it's very straightforward, it's like action, reaction, simple. And I ran it for 2 sessions, and I'm like, oh, I don't like this either. Even though I sat down and mechanically designed it such as to be perfect for me, as I got to actually trying to run it, I was struck by how much I still just did not enjoy that space of game as much as I wanted to. So it's fascinating to see that there are so many different kinds of TTRPG experiences out there, because I feel a little bit like there's a comparison to the explosion of different types of video games in like the 80s and 90s, where, first we have Pong and then Pac-Man and, kind of games in that similar arcadey ilk. And it's like, oh, wait, we can do racing games with video games. We can do fishing games. We can do RPGs. And like, you're realizing that, oh, games don't have to look and play the same. Like, we can do first-person shooters. We can do all kinds of, we can do strategy games. And then the language of design and the kinds of things that you can do with that medium just expands and expands and expands as people stop finding themselves limited by one technology, but really two, more creatively, like the bounds of what games are supposed to play like. And I know board games have been around for significantly longer than video games just because no technology requirement. But whether it's, the internet expanding in the last, 2 decades, or the market can just now support more of these kinds of small games than before, where you had to go through big publishers. So it's like, I'm not going to take a chance on this. Thirsty sword lesbians? No way. And now the internet's like, yes.
I'd say it's definitely the internet.
It's really cool to see that kind of explosion in the game space happening that I was up until 2 hours ago completely unaware of.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the internet makes it completely possible for, just an independent creator to distribute something without having to go through any sort of popularity-minded middleman to actually get eyes on it. So you can just get people being extremely experimental, testing things out, mashing things up. I'd say this is comparable less to the early days of video game development and more to the early days of video game modding, when people would start doing, like, just ROM hacks and custom levels for like early Super Mario and stuff like that. And it all just ended up turning into, oh yeah, now that, this technology required for this is universally accessible, people can start getting weird with it. But of course, with
it's like people making game types in Gary's mod. It's like once they realize that, like, okay, sure, it's Half-Life, but like I can also make hide and seek games and like prop hunt and stuff.
But of course, the thing with TTRPGs is that there is no technological requirement. You can just sit down with pen and paper and come up with a way that you can roll some dice. Dice optional for some of these, I assume.
Oh yeah, a lot of these don't use dice.
Yeah, it's just coming up with a game. Theoretically, anybody could do that. I think what the internet has done is really allow for communities to spring up where people can sort of crowdsource the development of these things, playtest them, polish them up a lot better than they could before. And it's extremely cool.
Yeah, and distributors like itch being readily accessible make them actually getting out there a lot easier too.
Yeah. Whew, I'm a little bit speechless.
I could talk for hours more.
Please don't.
That's the power of the retail diatribe format.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
This was extremely cool. There's a lot of stuff in here for people to check out, and a lot of course, stuff for them to think about, to look within, perhaps, to examine the possibilities of game development lurking just under the skin. You put a lot of horror on this for somebody who categorically doesn't like horror things.
Here's the thing. Just because I don't like something doesn't mean I can't appreciate it.
Okay.
You know?
No.
Yeah. Okay.
But I will say I do appreciate not only like the breadth of different kinds of games that you've laid out for us, but the understanding that it's about what people value in a game that might lead them to one or the other. It's not like D&D is trash. If you play it, you're stupid. If you like it, you're an idiot. It's like, no, for a lot of people, it is the most widely accessible thing where there's the most resources for it and the most people are going to be familiar with it. But for the person who D&D doesn't scratch that that itch. It just doesn't work. There are so many games out there, so
Yeah.
I appreciate your point at the beginning where it's not to say that like D&D is a gutter game, maybe personal opinions notwithstanding.
Yeah, I didn't want to out you. But like,
Okay, listen,
It's not that it's
Yeah, I do not like D&D 5th edition very much. I have had fun with it. I've run it and I've played it and I've been like, yeah, this is a fun experience because I'm having a social experience with friends and that's fun. These games, all the ones I've highlighted, do a lot better job of making me have more fun than D&D did.
yeah, that makes sense. I also feel like a lot of this is, it's sort of an iterative process. Like almost all forms of art, you know, the person who goes on to create a specific story didn't have that story in their life, but they wanted it. They were like, man, this is pretty fun, but I think it would be better if it did this, and that gives them an idea, and then they create something adjacent to doing whatever that thing is.
Yeah.
And it feels like a lot of, because D&D has changed over the years, but not much. Mechanically, it's very similar to what it used to be, and the fact is, D&D does not need to be all these things. D&D can just be D&D, but other games do exist to fill the holes that D&D does not. Like, that's kind of the...
And even like, you know, I brought in like the Fightgames at the beginning because those fill the holes that D&D arguably does, but in ways that I enjoy more based on what things appeal to my experiences, and I know a lot of other people do too.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's, even if this is in a similar space, it doesn't jive with you quite like this game does, and then you play that and you're like, wow, this is rad.
Yeah. The fact is, no art form should be a monoculture.
Absolutely.
Everything benefits from a diversity of just experiences and stories and completely different structures. Like, the thing is, if you start from the assumption that every game has to function sort of similar to D&D, you don't get anything like that crazy-ass Dark Souls game.
Yeah.
Where it's like, who's the DM? What's the story?
Yeah.
Who are the characters?
Yeah, what are your PCs like?
Yeah,
And it's like,
well, no.
Fundamentally, a lot of that is there is an explicit marketing effort to sell D&D as the one RPG that exists, and therefore other RPGs become, oh, this is D&D like, even when, as I've shown here, a lot of them aren't, and even the ones that are doing different things.
Yeah, and the problem is then it turns into like, well, this isn't like D&D at all. It's failing to be D&D.
Exactly.
It's the whole like, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree. Yeah, I think
Boss Baby vibes from these other
God damn
games.
it. Oh my god, that's so accurate.
Yeah, that's really it. When all you've seen is D&D, everything is D&D but slightly different.
Wow. Oh, that's blowing my mind. Okay. Well, this was extremely fun.
Yeah.
We never really know how to end these things.
So,
and I don't really... Yeah.
Bye!
Well, see ya. I ruined their outro.
No!